Good morning, Kids Church. Thank you for being here to listen today. How were your holidays? What was your favourite thing that you did? What's it bit like being back at school? Well, this term at Kids Church, we're going to keep looking through the book of Genesis together. We've seen so far how good God is and how not good people are. We've seen that God loves the people He has made, and He made promises to a man named Abraham to reverse the curse. We saw God promise land, people, and blessing to Abraham, and that these promises have been passed from Abraham to Isaac. Last time, with Kirsten, we saw God at work still growing His people as Isaac married Rebecca. Well, today we're going to meet Isaac and Rebecca's sons, and we're going to be reminded of two big things. The first thing is that God is the one who chooses who will be His people. God is the one who chooses who will be His people. And He chooses people because of His mercy. The second thing is that God's promises are precious. Well, let's hear the next part of God's story in Genesis, from Genesis chapter 25. Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was childless. The Lord answered his prayer, and his wife Rebecca became pregnant. The babies jostled each other within her, and she said, "Why is this happening to me?" So she went to inquire of the Lord. The Lord said to her, "Two nations are in your womb, and two peoples from within you will be separated. One people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger." Did you hear that? No children. They prayed, them twins, but twins who didn't get on even from in their mum's womb. And did you hear what God said? Something very surprising. Normally, the younger serves the older because the older inherits everything when his dad dies. But God has chosen, God has said this time, the oldest will serve the youngest. Let's find out more about these boys. When the time came for her to give birth, there were twin boys in her womb. The first to come out was red, and his whole body was like a hairy garment, so they named him Esau. After this, his brother came out, with his hand grasping Esau's heel, so he was named Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when Rebekah gave birth to them. The boys grew up, and Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the open country, while Jacob was content to stay at home among the tents. Isaac, who had a taste for wild game, loved Esau, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Twin boys, the same birthday, but very different from each other. Here they are when they're a bit older. Esau, the firstborn, the oldest, a hairy man, a skillful hunter. Jacob, the youngest, not hairy and not a hunter. And he came out holding his brother's heel. Well, what next? Before I read this bit, it helps to know what a birthright is. It's the right that Esau has because he was born first. It means he will inherit or get all that Isaac owns when he dies. And that includes God's blessing, God's promises being passed on to him. Very special, very precious. Let's see if Esau thinks so. Once, when Jacob was cooking some stew, Esau came in from the open country, famished. He said to Jacob, "Quick, let me have some of that red stew. I'm famished." Jacob replied, "First, sell me your birthright." "Look, I'm about to die," Esau said. "What good is the birthright to me?" But Jacob said, "Swear to me first." So he swore an oath to him, selling his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau some bread and some lentil stew. He ate and drank and then got up and left. So Esau despised his birthright. Did you hear that? Esau was born first, and so should have got everything from his father Isaac. But he sold it to his brother for a bowl of stew. He traded away the promises of God because he was hungry. I've got a friend today. He didn't treat God's promises as precious or important at all. Well, a little bit later in Genesis, we see Jacob tricking his very old father Isaac so that the promises are indeed passed to him. With the help of his mother, he dresses in animal skin so he's hairy like Esau. And because Isaac is old and blind, he blesses Jacob instead of Esau, just as God said would happen. God chose who would receive his promises before they were even born. Did you know that in the New Testament, in the book of Romans, it talks about what happened with Jacob and Esau? It talks about how God chooses who his people will be, and how it doesn't depend on people trying hard or doing good or bad, but it depends on God's mercy to save. And in Hebrews, in the New Testament, it says, make sure you're not like Esau. He didn't think that God's promises were precious, that God's blessings were precious, and he traded them for a bowl of soup. Make sure you don't trade God's promises for anything. Well, do you know that there isn't anything you can do or not do to earn God's forgiveness, God's blessing? Did you know that you being a Christian, one of God's people, doesn't depend on you and what you do? It depends on God. Because no one deserves to be forgiven, do they? No one deserves to be made one of God's people. But God shows mercy, and he gives us what we don't deserve. God shows mercy in that while we were still sinners, not treating God as the King, he sent Jesus to die for us and rise again so we can be forgiven. This is God's promise. This is God's blessing. This is how the curse is finally and fully reversed. God's promise and God's blessing is so precious. So don't be like Esau and don't trade it or swap it or give it away for anything. How about I pray? Dear God, we thank you for your word, the Bible, in Genesis. We thank you for your promises and that you keep your promises. We thank you that in your mercy you choose people to be your people. And we thank you that your promises and your blessing are precious. Please help us to be people who trust in you, the promise-keeping God, and who hold on to your promises tight. Amen. Well, Kids Church, thank you for listening today. Until next time, bye.